How are you doing again? It's good to be with you as we continue to celebrate this wonderful Easter season of the church. There's a very interesting reference in this week's scripture passages, and it is found in the Acts of the Apostles. It says something that struck me. My brothers, one can confidently say to you about the patriarch David that he died and was buried, and his tomb is in our midst to this day. Now, it's very strange that passage might say to you, why is that so important? Well, if you've ever been to Jerusalem, and I have been, thankfully, to God that I have the chance to visit the holy city, we had visited the cenacle, the place where Jesus had the Last Supper. Well, it's really interesting. If you go out of the cenacle, where Jesus had the Last Supper, and walk around and down and around the other side of the building, in the basement, you might say, is a synagogue dedicated as a burial place of King David. I was just sort of really, wow, how strange it is. But then again, the Acts of the Apostles makes a reference. At that time even, they were speaking of King David and the importance of King David. And in talking about Jesus, they would always make sure there was reference to his messianic, Davidic heritage that he had. But he was making a claim, the Acts of the Apostles, St. Peter was saying to them, he was saying that there's a prophecy found in one of the writings of King David, the Psalms as we call them. And that psalm mentioned how that my flesh too will dwell in hope, because you will not abandon my soul to the nether world, nor will you suffer your Holy One to see corruption. You have made known to me the paths of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence. You'll make known to me the paths of life. Actually, that's the responsorial psalm for this Sunday. Lord, you will show me the path of life. You will show us the path of life. And then St. Peter says, well, these words are of King David and cannot apply to King David because he's dead and buried. We know where his tomb is. And of course, St. Peter would say we know where Jesus' tomb was because it's empty. And he has been raised up, and he is the source of salvation that you crucified when you put him on the cross. This Lord of life, who shows us the path of life, reminds us that one of the ways of looking at our human life really is a journey. It is always something we're looking for. We're in a sense always in movement in life. And that's what's so beautiful about the passage of the Gospel from St. Luke, called the Journey to Emmaus, of the two disciples of Jesus who meet him unexpectedly and unaware of who he really is. They meet him. It's really interesting. It's an interesting story because really it is a you might say it's like a metaphor of our human life. We're always walking somewhere. We're always going somewhere, and we're always meeting people. Different people. Sometimes we recognize them, sometimes we don't, sometimes we become acquainted with them. You might say our life is really a journey. It's always a journey. We're always on the journey of Emmaus. It's really interesting that the party that's mentioned, one of them, it says, was named Cleopas. Cleopas is one of them. Now, it's really interesting that I never paid attention to it. But there is a mention in the Scriptures, in the Gospel of St. John, of a Mary of Clopas. Pretty close to Cleopas and Clopas. Actually, those who study the ancient Greek language said that, there's really not much difference between the two. They could be actually the same name. And that's interesting. You have Mary of Clopas, who's at the foot of the cross, and then you have Cleopas, who is the one mentioned going with Jesus, is one of the two that are walking to Emmaus after Jesus' death. And it's very interesting because one of the people that is involved in the scriptures suggested this could be a husband and wife. They are the ones that encounter Jesus. And that special encounter in Emmaus, they meet this stranger, they talk with the stranger, and suddenly the stranger says, well, I'll stay with you for a little bit to eat. They have a meal, and it says in the breaking of the bread, he takes the bread and breaks it, and then he disappears from their presence. Something special happens. Something special happens in that moment when they are encountering Jesus. I think it's important as Christians to always believe and hope and pray and always be on watch as we live through life, as we make the journey of life, as we meet different people, as we encounter different difficulties as well as wonderful things. We realize that Jesus is among us and with us. And in the encounter, especially when we come to the Eucharist and have the holy meal, eat his body and blood, and recognize him in that breaking of the bread and the holy chalice, that we should recognize, that we need to recognize he's working at us and each other in our journey of life, like the two that made the journey to Emmaus.